Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. I still get chills when I think back to that fateful first date with Claire last year. We had matched on Tinder a few weeks prior and hit it off right away through messages. She was sweet, intelligent, and seemed totally normal from our conversations. After talking nonstop about our shared interests, cracking each other up with bad jokes, and staying up late texting a few nights, we finally made plans to meet up in person. I remember feeling really optimistic about Claire as I got ready that morning. I took extra time picking out a casual but nice outfit, blue button-down shirt with dark jeans. I even splashed on the expensive cologne I save for special occasions. I was careful to pick a spotless picnic blanket and packed a bag with all Claire's favorite foods that she had mentioned: fresh berries, crusty French bread, aged cheddar, and chocolate truffles for dessert. I arrived early at the park to scout the optimal picnic location. I settled on a grassy spot underneath a towering oak tree near the pond. It was a picture-perfect spring day, sunny and mild with a light breeze that ruffled the water's surface. Families and couples milled around the park enjoying the weather. I tried to ignore the nervous flutters in my stomach as I smoothed out the blanket and artfully arranged the food, plates, utensils, and bottle of white wine I had chilled. I checked my watch again and again as noon approached, the time we'd agreed to meet. Right on the dot, I saw her walking down the paved path that looped around the pond. My breath caught in my throat. She looked just as beautiful as the photos on her Tinder profile, with long wavy brown hair and a warm, genuine smile. I stood up and waved. Claire spotted me and headed over. We exchanged slightly awkward hellos and nice to meet yous. I helped her sit down on the blanket while complimenting her pretty floral sundress. The conversation flowed easily once we began grazing on the feast I had brought. I had been worried about stretched silences or struggling to find things to talk about, but there was no hint of that. The wine helped relax us both as we discovered we shared so many of the same interests: indie movies, hiking, and a love for big fluffy dogs. She laughed at my lame attempts at jokes. I was thrilled to make her smile so much and see her eyes light up when she got excited talking about a passion of hers. 2 hours passed by in the blink of an eye. I was having the best time getting to know Claire. Occasional lulls in the conversation were comfortable and not awkward. Everything felt so natural and right. I remember thinking I could stay there all day chatting and picnicking with her. I didn't want the day to end. That's when I heard a blood-curdling shriek in the distance that jolted me out of my happy love bubble. "There you are, you bastard." Claire and I both snapped our heads towards the voice. My heart stopped when I saw my enraged ex-girlfriend Liz stomping through the grass straight towards me, pure fury in her eyes. I broke out in a cold sweat, my mind racing. How did she find me here? Why today of all days? Liz and I had an extremely messy breakup over 6 months ago after I discovered she had cheated on me with a coworker. I was devastated at the time, but did my best to cut contact with her completely afterward. I blocked her calls, texts, and filtered her from my social media. I knew she had some mental health issues and I wanted a clean break. Claire knew none of this backstory, of course, as Liz approached. "You lying, cheating scumbag." Liz hurled insults at me, calling me every vulgar name she could think of at the top of her lungs. Poor Claire looked completely blindsided and terrified by the unwarranted verbal assault. She shrank away from Liz. My protective instincts flared up seeing sweet Claire so upset. Before I could say or do anything, Liz turned her rage on Claire, calling her awful names I refused to repeat. Claire pleaded with her to please calm down and leave us be. My blood boiled hearing Liz threaten Claire, who was innocently caught in the crosshairs of my vindictive ex. That's when Liz snapped. She lunged forward and grabbed a fistful of Claire's long hair, yanking aggressively. Claire let out a scream of shock and pain that tore right through me. She begged Liz to stop, but my deranged ex kept her grip. Seeing Claire in distress triggered something in me. I leaped to my feet and forcefully pulled Liz away to end her assault. Free from Liz's clutches, Claire seized the opportunity to grab her purse and sprint away down the trail without looking back. I tried calling after her, but my focus had to be on restraining Liz. The demonic look on Liz's face chilled me. She scoffed that I deserved to have my date ruined for trying to replace her. I opened my mouth to curse her out, but she squirmed out of my grasp and scurried away just as quickly as she had appeared. I stood there panting, overwhelmed with shock and adrenaline. My idyllic date had descended into a nightmare in mere minutes. I could still hear Claire's screams echoing in my mind. I tried texting and calling Claire right away to try to explain and apologize, but she never answered. She ended up blocking my number, which I don't blame her for. I can only imagine how traumatized she must have been. I was furious with myself for letting my toxic history with Liz literally chase away an innocent, lovely woman who had done nothing to deserve that chaos and drama on what was supposed to be a fun first date. In the weeks following the park fiasco, I replayed every detail in my mind. I cringed thinking what Claire must think of me after witnessing that volcanic meltdown courtesy of my ex. The more I thought about it, the more I regretted not having security there as protection, or at least giving Claire a heads up about Liz in case there was an issue. I kept imagining different ways I could have better prepared for Liz's arrival or sooner defended Claire from her vitriol. But it was too late. The damage was done. I still shudder when I think back to my disturbing encounters with Edward from Tinder last year. When we first matched, he seemed totally normal and nice during our light-hearted messaging banter. But it unfortunately didn't take long for his facade to crumble and his true unsavory intentions to reveal themselves. Our conversation started out light and friendly at first. His witty jokes and flattering comments on my photos caught my eye while aimlessly swiping one lonely Friday night. We bonded over our mutual interests listed in our bios: hot yoga, dog rescue charities, obscure indie bands. He came across as easygoing and down-to-earth, without any obvious red flags popping up initially. After a week or so of nonstop text sessions and late-night phone calls, he suggested meeting up for a proper first date to check our chemistry in person. He asked me to dinner at a new Thai restaurant downtown that happened to be on my must-try list. I enthusiastically said yes for the following Saturday night and began giddily daydreaming about what to wear. I remember taking extra care getting ready that evening, playfully debating between flirty dress options before settling on a low-cut floral max dress. I even borrowed a friend's curling iron to touch up my long hair into soft waves. My stomach fluttered with excited nerves on the drive over, optimistic that Edward could end up being relationship material. The conversation flowed easily once we were seated across from each other sipping Thai iced teas. We swapped funny stories about nightmare roommates, ridiculous college adventures, and embarrassing early dating mishaps. I was relieved we could banter just as well in person. Edward's eye contact and body language seemed engaged and sincere as he asked thoughtful questions about my job, family, and dreams for the future. After we finished sharing an indulgent slice of coconut cake, Edward suggested taking a stroll along the river walk as the sun began to set. The idea sounded romantic and I readily agreed. As we meandered, Edward casually brushed his hand against mine before interlacing our fingers. My heart skipped a beat at the affectionate gesture. I really thought we were hitting it off and on the same page about taking things slow. But that changed quickly once the sky darkened fully. Edward pointed out a row of lively bars up ahead on the river, nudging me to stop for a drink together. I politely declined, explaining I avoid going to strangers' homes or isolated bars on early dates. I hoped you would understand my need to take precautions until we knew each other better. Instead of responding graciously, though, Edward grew pushy and frustrated. He kept insisting I come back to his place for one more drink. He brushed off all my gentle reminders that I preferred to move slowly in new relationships and didn't drink much anyways. I started to feel uneasy at his refusal to just accept my no at face value and our evening. When he eventually dropped all pretense of politeness and started making outright crude remarks, my blood ran cold. I called him out for disrespecting my clearly stated boundaries. But Edward just sneered that I was a prude who had led him on all night. Hearing him spit such demeaning things after I did nothing to encourage that expectation made my stomach churn. I immediately deleted his number and hightailed it back to my parked car, feeling shaken by his drastic transformation from sweet gentleman to entitled jerk. My brain spun trying to pinpoint when exactly the switch had flipped. When did harmless flirting crossed into harassment territory? Had I missed or misread any warning signs earlier? Over the next couple weeks, I constantly second-guessed and blamed myself until one night, when an unknown number messaged me vulgar things confirming it was Edward harassing me from burners after I blocked him. I felt so violated knowing he had circumvented my boundaries and still had access to me. I ended up deleting my Tinder profile entirely, worried he would find other channels to reach me if I stayed visible online. In retrospect, there were some subtle red flags I overlooked in our initial conversations and my optimism. The over-the-top flattery getting inappropriate too quickly, his overly entitled persistence about my personal time and space regardless of my hesitance. I clearly needed to trust my gut more going forward when something feels off instead of giving manipulative men infinite chances. I assumed blocking him would be the end of our brief, disastrous interactions. But Edward had other plans. Over the following months, eerie incidents kept happening. Anonymous gifts delivered to my home, being followed while jogging, my tires slashed overnight. Though I had no definitive proof, all signs pointed to a scarily obsessed Edward ramping up his harassment of me. Things escalated to where I never felt safe alone, constantly paranoid he might try to confront me in person. I ended up having to take drastic measures, quitting my job, breaking my apartment lease early, and moving across the country to stay with family until things cooled down. Completely uprooting my life was the only way I could think of to evade Edward's disturbing fixation. Starting fresh in a new city did help me regain a sense of empowerment after feeling so victimized. The distance gave me perspective that no matter how harmless a man seems at first, I have to be on high alert for any signs of dishonesty, instability, or entitlement brewing beneath the surface. I still went to find love, but I could never ignore another gut feeling about a man's potential danger. Sometimes I wondered if Edward just moved on to harassing his next unsuspecting Tinder match after I disappeared. I debated going to the police, but had no hard proof of his unhinged behaviors. All I had left were emotional scars, reminding me to be way more cautious and skeptical when dealing with potentially manipulative men online. When I do eventually dip my toes back into dating, I plan to take things even slower and be ready to cut off contact at the very first red flag. No more giving controlling creeps too much leeway in the name of giving them a chance. My safety and comfort has to come first after learning the hard way with Edward. One thing's for sure, the block button will be put to good use if any more suspicious matches come my way down the road. I won't repeat mistakes of the past again. I still feel embarrassed thinking back on my brief dating fiasco last year with Nathan, who I met through Tinder. When we first matched, he portrayed himself as a highly successful entrepreneur, boasting nonstop about being a wealthy CEO who owned multiple impressive companies. I later discovered those were complete fabrications to impress me. In reality, Nathan was just an average junior employee at McDonald's with no businesses or investments to his name at all. Initially, Nathan seemed honest enough from his Tinder profile in our first series of text conversations. His bio mentioned entrepreneurship being one of his greatest passions in life. I naturally assumed he meant he aspired to start his own business someday, not that he currently helmed multi-million-dollar corporations. Based on the recent college grad vibe of his smiling photos, I pegged Nathan as around my age, probably still searching for his career path like most 22-year-olds. But I couldn't have been more wrong about him. When we met up for our first date at a trendy new speakeasy lounge downtown, Nathan regaled me for hours with wildly impressive tales of his globe-trotting lifestyle and important meetings with celebrity investors. He referenced elite business conferences he had supposedly been invited to speak at in places as far-flung as Dubai and Hong Kong. At one point, he even paused our conversation to take a very urgent call from his West Coast partners, stepping away from the table for several minutes to speak in hushed tones. I'm ashamed to admit it, but at first I was rather enthralled as I sipped my lavender martini and listened to Nathan name-drop famous entrepreneurs he had allegedly collaborated with. He really sold the image of a mature, refined wonderkind who had amazingly built a business empire before even turning 25. I felt flattered that such a successful young genius businessman seemed interested in me and made time in his busy schedule to go out. It wasn't until our third date that Nathan's elaborate stories first began to raise some doubts. We were strolling downtown after a fancy dinner when we passed a rowdy group of young guys around our age, wearing McDonald's uniforms and joking loudly on their way to start a late shift. Nathan made a snooty comment about how pathetic it was that some people our age chose minimum wage fast food work over trying to make something meaningful of themselves. I bristled a bit at his condescending attitude and pointed out that not everyone had the chance or resources right out of college to become a wealthy entrepreneur. He got oddly defensive and snippy, questioning my motivations and business savvy. His haughty reaction to those guys stuck with me. It was the first seed of doubt planted in my mind about the veracity of Nathan's alleged business success. When I got home that night, I decided to investigate him further. I spent over an hour trying to Google any trace of the elite corporations he claimed to have founded and operated. Unsurprisingly, I could find absolutely no evidence that any of them actually existed. The next time we got dinner, I started gently pressing Nathan for more concrete details about his various multi-million-dollar business ventures. He became flustered, stumbling over his words until this story is completely unraveled under my persistent scrutiny. Finally, he blurted out sheepishly that he may have innocently exaggerated about his entrepreneurial career just a tiny bit, in order to impress a classy, beautiful girl like myself. As it turned out, Nathan was far from being a jet-setting CEO. He was in fact just a junior cashier at that McDonald's who walked by, likely jealous of his former classmates who got to live carefree party lifestyles. I was really disappointed he had been so deliberately dishonest from the start, but figured maybe he truly admired entrepreneurship and just had poor execution when trying to portray that image to win me over. Against my better judgment, I decided to give Nathan a second chance. But the lies and evasiveness continued. Whenever I asked simple questions about where he lived or worked, Nathan dodged giving direct answers. He gave vague, ever-changing responses about what part of town he supposedly resided in. When I offered to pick him up for dates, he always insisted on meeting me places instead. More red flags popped up when he declined my request to see his apartment, making excuses that it was too messy and embarrassing right now. After nearly 2 months of this, I finally got fed up and directly demanded Nathan tell me the full truth about where and how he actually lived. After hemming and hawing for several minutes, staring at the tablecloth, Nathan finally admitted he didn't really reside in any of the upscale downtown lofts he had described to me before. In reality, he rented a small basement room in his parents' modest suburban home about 40 minutes outside the city. Again, his living situation itself wasn't necessarily bad or shameful in my eyes, but the ongoing deception about major parts of his life was very troublesome. He swore up and down that he resolved to be completely honest with me going forward now that the truth was out. And foolishly soft-hearted as I was, I chose to give Nathan yet another chance. That wavering resolve of mine evaporated instantly the day I walked into the downtown McDonald's for a quick lunch and saw Nathan behind the counter, wearing the restaurant's uniform and name tag. The shock and disbelief must have been all over my face when I recognized him serving customers. Nathan looked utterly mortified when he spotted me waiting in line. In that jarring moment, I knew without a doubt that Nathan's endless tall tales and secrecy about mundane details of his everyday reality were ultimately too big a hurdle for our budding relationship to overcome. As much as I cared about him, the constant duplicity surrounding major parts of his life made it impossible for me to ever fully trust him as a partner. I wanted someone I could have faith in completely, and that clearly wasn't Nathan. I ended things for good soon after in one final painful conversation where I calmly but firmly explained my reasons for needing a clean break. Of course, Nathan tried justifying his lies as harmless, claiming he had planned to gradually come clean once we got more serious down the road. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.